please feel free to take as long as you like. But normally we have some time for questions and comments if anybody wants to. But I'll let you handle that whatever way you want to handle it, Mary. And yeah, just thank you again, and over to you.
Okay. Well, I'm not really sure where to start, except that I thought about, I wrote some things down earlier, which I don't usually do, but took some time to reflect this morning and write notes. But I guess I guess I'd like to start with saying that, you know, um, when I came across the principles 27 years ago, I had such a profound shift that I decided I had to share it with people. And I was listening to a really, really old Sid Banks recording this morning about, and he said just that. It was called Sharing. I don't know if it's probably one of the bootleg recordings that I have. um, and he talked about sharing, and he talked about how, you know, you get touched by this yourself, and then you go out and share. And that's really what this is about, because the three principles isn't an approach, it's an understanding of the truth about how human beings operate and about life, I think, um, and about our spirituality. I could go on about that too, but so having seen this for myself, I didn't know that I ever even wanted to go into the mental health field. That was never like a thing in my career path. And I'd been quite lost. I had a very, kind of a personal black period after college where I kind of bottomed out and some self-destruction and some of my own mental health issues. So I was pretty lost, and then I found this. But I think that, when you look back on things, you think, well, that's just the way it was supposed to supposed to play out, right? Um, and so when I found this, I just knew I had to share it. So going to graduate school and getting a degree in psychology seemed like the most logical thing to do, and a way I could build a career around it. But even back then, because my mentor is very adamant about, this is just an understanding. It's not a thing. Counseling and coaching are just the same thing. There's no difference when you're coming from a three principles perspective. But I went through the hoops of learning to be a therapist, which mostly was theories of personality and things like that. It really wasn't much about counseling skills in my program, looking back on it. Wish it had been the other way around. But when I got out of there and I just started sharing with people in groups or individuals, I just went wherever I was invited. And it happened to be in a lot of treatment centers. So I just got used to just sharing as best I could with people of all walks of life, varying levels of being able to listen. A lot of people not able to listen, but some. And I just kind of stumbled my way through and just kept going, going, going until as long as I was invited, I would be a guest speaker or a therapist or whatever. I was a group facilitator. So um, I just kind of learned by doing and honed my skills by trial and error. And the listening piece I had, the deep listening piece I had already, but the rest of it kind of had to come along. And so, anyway, about the coaching. So as I moved along, as the coaching field started to kind of explode with three principles people, all of a sudden one of my colleagues is like, Mary, you got to see what's going on out there. You got to join these groups and kind of keep an eye on what's going on with these coaches. And I was like, I do? Okay. So I just started to get introduced to people and meet some coaches and observe what was going on. And I even spoke with coaches and followed some coaches, and they said, oh, you could totally be a coach. All you have to do is just call yourself a coach. And if you're coming from a three principles perspective, it really doesn't make a difference. So I thought, okay, cool, I'll do that. Well, then, I have a private practice in Minneapolis where I see clients individually here. And I would get every now and then a referral from a three principles person or things like that for education or for coaching. But I really had trouble trying to kind of bridge the gap between me and building a coaching career, as they say. And then it dawned on me one day that, maybe I should get some coach training. which is kind of like, hello. So, so I looked into it, and I was really fortunate because I looked into it, and there's a lot of programs out there, and they're very expensive, and they just didn't feel right to me. So then I stumbled upon a woman named Marion Franklin who learned from Thomas Leonard, who is apparently one of the more original coaches, apparently, who started coaching you back in the day. And she has she does training in what's called laser focused coaching, which is different than laser coaching. It's not the 15-minute, quick coaching, but it is shorter duration. It's like 30 to 45 minutes. And it's not a method. She doesn't want to call it a methodology, but there's a process of sorts, like things you keep in mind and ways of having dialogue. Well, I learned a lot. Talk about under promise and over deliver. I always get that backwards. It was an amazing training. I learned all kinds of skills. And her philosophy and the skills fit hand in glove with my understanding of the principles. So, and where I was already coming from with working with human beings. So I don't, I was asked the other day, is there a difference between coaching and therapy? Well, from a principles perspective, not really, but there is in terms of my licensure, of course. And also I see now, having taken this training, there is a difference in what people bring to the table, certainly, of course, and also kind of how you go about the conversation. And what I learned was, and what I learned also was very different than what I saw a lot of other coaches doing. I'll just say that. I don't want to be critical, but it's very different than what I see a lot of coaches doing. And I learned the simplicity and honing in and the client making the agenda. You don't get too much into story. It really fits hand in glove because with the three principles understanding, because what I was doing before was listening beyond all the content and the details for how this person is how they where they think their experience is coming from and how they put how they put things together in their own mind about their own story. And I would always be listening kind of deeper for that kind of thing anyway. Well, these skills fit hand in glove with that, but with a little bit more skill in how to actually do that. So I feel really fortunate to have both now, and it's helped all of my work just to get I would say just a little more streamlined. The conversations are a little more streamlined, and at the end of 35, 45 minutes, people have a shift. And I've brought this into my therapy practice as well. So I don't know that I'm even talking about what anybody wants to hear. So I don't know what you want to hear, but I guess
Yeah, I was going to ask you just a couple of things. I think what you're talking about is great, but I was going to say, you mentioned mistakes that people make, and I think it can be really useful to know that, there's that sort of sense. And I wondered what some of the mistakes that you've seen people, especially new to the three principles, making in what they're calling coaching, and perhaps it isn't coaching at all. I wonder if anything comes to mind, because I know you also mentor people, and that you have that role too.
Well, I just think that it's important to, I mean, for me, and there's a lot of opinions about this, so I don't know that it's as accurate. But what I've come to understand is that, when the client comes with something that they want to see change or shift. And I think for me, it's been really helpful to know which hat I'm wearing. It's like in my therapy session, my clients will come and we just talk, and there's a lot of story, and there's meandering that happens. I'm still listening and I'm doing all of that, but I'm not really zeroing in like I do with the laser focused coaching skills. And it's about this, the client always sets the agenda for me. That's the one thing. Although I might bring some of my stories into it, but with coaching, we need to be out of the equation completely. Coach is out of the equation. It's not about us. And if we want to tell a story, we might make it more of a general story, or sometimes you can tell a personal story if it's on point. But I think that really we need to be out of it, and we're focused, and also kind of leading by following, like what someone says, we pick up on that and then we go forward. And in the dialoguing, just by asking open-ended what questions, that was big for me too. I mean, why and how questions can come up, but what questions are a lot more powerful. So I challenge myself to always form the question I have starting with a what, because they're just more powerful. I'm not really answering your question, Christian, but what I wanted to say was wearing the different hats. So if I'm in a therapy session and I'll say, someone's come bring something up, and I'll say, that might be something good that we can do a little coaching around. Would that be okay with you? Yes. Okay. So then I put on my coaching hat and we do a little coaching. And then I'll say, okay, I'm taking off my coaching hat now and we'll go back to just our regular conversation. Or I might throw in a little education on the principles, or tell them, use a metaphor or something like that. So, but I'm always mindful of where I'm coming from in terms of whether I'm doing what I would call more pure coaching versus just having a conversation or doing a little consulting or doing a little education. And I know that can get, when I was first sharing the understanding as a practitioner, we'll just say, it doesn't matter what the label was. I tended to, because I saw a lot of people doing this, I tended to overshare sometimes, because I do use my experience, because I've learned, I've transformed a lot from this understanding of the mind. So sometimes I will use my experience, but over time, and maybe this was just my mistake, I overshared. And I've learned over time to kind of keep me out of it more and more and more, even in my therapy sessions. Although people do appreciate the humanity of that. Like, oh, you've been through that too? Cool. Oh, that's nice. They do appreciate that. So, yeah.
There is one question. I don't know if the poser wants to ask it or I can read it, because I know it's hard to read and talk at the same time. But I was going to ask you anyway something similar, because you said in coaching, you ask these what questions, you get a sense of following the client, and then often they have a some kind of shift or breakthrough in the session. And I wondered if you had an example of that, obviously anonymized, but I wondered if you had an example of when that had occurred, and sort of what it looks like as the questioner asks. Do you want to say anything in addition to that, Marty? No.
Well, and I saw that there's a what does good coaching look like question. So I can give kind of an overview of what I learned from this about coaching skills that I found really valuable. And the part of this fits hand in glove. I'm just going to give an overview and then I'll give an example. So first of all, asking the person what would be most valuable to talk about. The client gets to set the agenda. Now that can change. And then really and reflecting back, and then asking an open-ended question. This is what I heard, and then asking an open-ended question to get more. And there's two questions that you keep in mind, and I don't know that I can share those because they're kind of like trade secret unless you take the training. But there's a couple questions you want to keep in mind. I don't know if Marion would care for me to share those with you, but yeah, I can. So you want to keep in mind, why is this person telling me this, and why is this a problem for them? Now, I don't keep that in the front of my mind because that would be distracting me from listening. But it's kind of like the underlying, and it's just kind of common sense. And I thought, I kind of already did that in my 3 principles work anyway. But I like that that's highlighted, because that's kind of, why is this person telling me this, and why is this a problem for them? That's really helpful to kind of have as a basis. Then you ask, you form your questions based on just pure curiosity, and that part is also hand in glove with principles like, wonder why she said that. So I'll form a what question about what does that mean, or what is that about, or whatever. And then the dialogue goes on, and it's really what I found see, before in my work, before I had this kind of training, I could kind of flounder in a session and go all over the place, and you just kind of get lost. But to keep in a kind of have an agreement. It's not a formal agreement, but it is kind of an agreement of what you're focusing on and where you're going. And it really cuts to the heart of the matter, so that it'll, enable someone to have a shift more readily. So like, someone starts out with, I really want to understand more about, I'm having conflicts in my relationship. But then you start talking more, and you realize, well, I get irritable at work. And so they're talking about that, or so they morph into different things. So it's really helpful to step back and just say, you've mentioned this, this, and this. What would be most helpful in this conversation? And I tend to ask that now several times, and it kind of pulls us back to the point again and keeps us from straying and meandering too far, so that we can really hone in on what's most relevant now. What would be most helpful for you right in this conversation? And I found that extremely valuable. And then that leading by following is, whatever they just said, you pick up on that, you might reflect it, and then you ask about it, or you ask more about it. And the questions should be about the content of what someone's talking about, and not necessarily, like, I have a tendency, and this is what my trainer called nosy curiosity. I am really nosy, and I didn't know how nosy I was until I took this training. I mean, I want to know all kinds of things about these people's lives. And in therapy, I feel more free to talk that way. But really, I have to zip it and go, that's not really going to help the conversation move forward. That's just because I'm curious. And so that was a big one for me, to just ask a question or continue the conversation in a way that's going to move it forward, so that the client can benefit from it, not because I just had to know. So a big learning curve for me. And then usually there's a shift around in the middle where someone will have a change in tone. And I notice that. I'll say, okay, so this is kind of the pivot point. And I'll say, after asking questions, people just come up with their own answers, right? Because they already have them, which is, we know that in the three principles world, they've already got them. They just don't see it yet. So by asking and dialoguing, they come up with something, and then there's a tone shift. And then I'll say, when we started this conversation, and give a very brief, you were in conflict about this. Where are things now for you? See, so we're always pulling it back into this dialogue, this conversation. And inevitably, people will say, well, actually, now I'm seeing blah, blah, blah. And so after the shift happens, then you kind of start to wind up. And it's amazing. It happens in 30 to 45 minutes. Honestly, it does. And so, and even if it's not a big, huge insight, sometimes it's a huge insight. Sometimes it's just a minor, oh, you know what? I see more clearly about this now, or something like that. But then after you just kind of start to wind up with, is there anything more you'd like to know or talk about? Who or what can be a resource for you? And I think in traditional coaching, from what I've heard, I haven't taken other types of training, but it's more goal oriented. And this is really more conversation oriented. And as I said, it fits hand in glove with this understanding of the inside out nature of our experience, and the fact that we have this capacity for insight and wisdom is, we're one thought away from that at any given moment. So I just feel like I'm the facilitator, helping people kind of zero in and look inside and pull that out. And the actual art of the conversation does that. It's beautiful. So, and there's a lot of other things, like just different things like painting the picture. If someone's really stuck on something, painting the picture. That's probably been taught in the coaching world. And I've done that too, just from 3 principles, like, well, what if this, and getting people to look ahead and imagine something different for themselves. And then you always come back or with a question. And if I do a little teaching, if I step out and say, I'm going to share something about, or just talk about in general about human beings without using my own example, and share some understanding of the mind. And I do that education, I always now end it with, what comes up for you when I say that? Or what do you think? So I always put it back to the client and asking them. So those kinds of skills, I don't want to necessarily call them techniques, but just kind of a way of having a dialogue, have been really helpful. Now, in my coaching or my counseling business, it's therapy because they're paying me through insurance. Okay, so that's the legal part of it, right? So, but recently I had a conversation. This is an example that just comes to mind. I'm working with a gal who has been very stuck with a lot of shoulds and a lot of, we'll just say, conditioning from what she learned from her parents about career and money and moving forward in her life, which has been at odds with her own wisdom, I'm going to say. And so in the middle, at one point in one of our sessions, I said, well, let's do a little coaching around that next time. So we did. So the next time we came in and I said, asked her the questions. And so she told me, she shared these shoulds, basically. She didn't actually use the word should, but I just said, well, what's true about that? Or I said, what's really true about that? And she stopped and she didn't have an answer. And then we just did a little further dialoguing about that. And I dug a little deeper about what's really true about that, what's really true about that. And all of a sudden she went, oh my God, I've been carrying around these thoughts that I learned from my parents' words, really, and battling them in my mind for much of my adult life. And I didn't even know that that's what was getting in my way, or something like that. I don't remember the exact words of any session, but it was a definite 180 for her. And it was really cool. Another example was in another coaching session with a client who was having a lot of trouble with anger outbursts in her marriage and temper tantrums. And she really gained a lot from just learning about the mind and how things work, and thought creates feeling and all that kind of stuff. She read the relationship handbook that helped her. Anyway, at one point she was talking about how, she kind of would always be kind of correcting her husband with different things and trying to goad him into doing different things differently. And I knew that I couldn't directly say anything about that. So it popped into my head, and this is something I'd learned in the coach training, that I said, it almost, the way you're describing those interactions with your husband there, almost sounds like a parent with a child, kind of instructional. What do you make of that? And she went, oh my gosh, I'm totally treating him like my child. So if I hadn't learned like kind of how to couch that with, you know what I mean? So those kinds of things have just come in real handy with when we're in the middle of a counseling session, just to pull it out and do a little coaching. But in my actual coaching work, it's really focused in, and there's always there at some point around, we start the conversation, and at some point around here, there's a shift generally, and then we wind up, and then we're done, and then we build on that if we want to. Again, the next session, I'll just say what would be most valuable for you, and I might say, hey, how did it go? It's like I'm not a huge rule follower, so even that's against the rules, I'm gonna do it anyway. But yeah, So I would say that combination of skills, experience, and really listening to yourself. I mean, again, you have to know this understanding for yourself before you can share it with anybody. So coming from what you know, and what this coach training taught me was that, because I would get like, a lot of inspiration or nudgings to go in a certain direction or say something or ask something, but I wasn't really sure what it was. And this has helped me kind of formulate the questions better, if that makes sense. I had the instinct for it, but this has helped me kind of actually get it into language that moves the conversation forward. So
Great examples. Great examples. Thank you. Are you up for some questions, Mary?
yeah.
Because Jerry had his hand up, and Jerry, if you want to ask a question, do you want to just unmute yourself and come in? I think you're muted. I think you have to unmute yourself.
Yeah. Hi, Mary.
Hi.
Hi. Wonderful.
Oh, good. Thank you. I feel like I'm in uncharted territory of things that I usually talk about. So, but thank you.
Join the club. For me, what struck me so much was the structure. Because one of the things I'm constantly trying to do in my job, I work part-time as an executive coach for charities and business, and looking at what you're talking about, it seems so simple, and I'm wondering why I take 2 hours to get to where you get to in 45 minutes, and I'm probably not hitting the same results as you're getting in 45 minutes. So I'm all ears.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah. Well, thank you for that. And I think that, you use the word structure, and there really is a structure to the conversation, even though you want to use that term loosely, because you still want to be present and listening and, not thinking about a structure while you're in the conversation, but just for me, it was having some guidelines of a flow, like a beginning, a middle, and an end of sorts, of kind of where you're aiming for, helped me kind of rein in all the extraneous, because you can imagine in 2 hours, there's got to be a lot of story, right? And sometimes people need to be heard, and that's great. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think that I prefer the kind of more cut to the chase kind of method, because there's a lot of fluff that doesn't really help move the conversation forward or the client.
Yeah.
And it sounds like you've noticed that.
Yeah, and I find too that when the further you go up the hierarchy in corporate, when you're working with CEOs and working with directors, that the high D, using the disc profile language, the direct approach, these people have a sense of urgency, the tension of a goldfish, like, come on, Jerry, one is done. Can we get this done in 15 minutes? And there's an hour booked in. Never mind about the money and the hour, just can we get this? And so what you're speaking to me about here is making so much sense to me. And I think one of the things that's missing for me is Christine and I were talking earlier before we come online, just for a couple of minutes. And I was saying to her that I'm trying to integrate the 3 principles into my practice, but I am aware of driving like mirror signal maneuver and people honking horns at me and say, come on, guy, get it together. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, no, I feel really clunky with it, and because I don't understand it, and I don't fully own it yet. I haven't fully internalized it. And I'm finding actually the process wonderful. Learning what Mr. Banks left behind him. Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, please, I don't have the words.
Right.
It's how I feel.
Yeah.
I don't have the words.
Yeah. But you have the feeling.
Oh, aye. Oh,
And that's all you need when you come from the feeling when you're in the work with people. And
I laugh more as a Doer Scot since I've met Mr. Banks than I've done my whole life. I laugh every day, and you know, it's not something I'm trying to do, but I find more joy,
yeah,
and I find folk more interesting.
yeah. Isn't that great?
Even politics, I find
Yeah.
a lot to laugh at there. Yeah.
Yeah, you and me.
Yeah. Anyway, look, enough already. There's a bunch of other people maybe want to talk. So sorry if I'm babbling on as usual.
Oh no, it's fine. It's fine. Thank you, Jerry.
And thank you.
Yeah, Jerry, thanks. Anyone else would like to take this golden opportunity to ask Mary anything within reason?
I may not answer it, but they can answer.
Yeah. Paul, would you just come in? I think you are unmuted, are you? Yeah. Please come in. Hi.
Thank you. And thank you, Mary. I'd like to hear about your changing hats.
Okay. So let's just say that someone is coming to me for coaching. That's what they're signing up for. Okay. So I've got my coaching hat on, meaning I'm going to be letting them set the agenda and asking open-ended questions, and kind of the structure, as we just said, that I've been following, that I've learned, that I found very useful. But there may be a moment where it seems that I want to stop and provide a little more education, or maybe even you could call it consulting, and I know that it's going to be longer than just a couple sentences. So I might just say, I'm going to take off my coaching hat right now, and I'm just going to put on my education hat and share some understanding of the mind with you that I've found very helpful. And then we'll go back to the coaching. And I don't have to do that, but I like doing that because I think that then the client knows where we're going, and it helps me stay clear on, if I were, and if I were to actually go for a coaching certificate, you would have to do that in order to get certified, because there's things that are deemed not coaching in the Federation. But so for me, though, it feels nicer to just say, okay, we're going to set that aside and go over here now. And now we'll go back to the coaching. And then I'll just say, what do you think of that? We're back to coaching. But it's not an absolute necessity. I just like to be clear in my mind as I'm going along in the dialogue. It helps me to kind of stay on task. It feels professional to me too. And then I feel like I'm not meandering. I feel like, okay, well, I'm intentionally going over here. I'm not meandering over here. That's really it.
Okay, so
Does that
it's
make
kind of yeah, sure. And it's kind of you asking permission to take your other hat on. So
that too? Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Another one is you named the system or the coaching practice you've learned. It was laser focused coaching. Is
Yes.
that?
Yeah. And I learned
And the lady who was yeah,
Marian Franklin is her name.
Marian Franklin.
Marian Franklin, and she
Oh,
even wrote
thank
a
you
book.
very much.
She even wrote a book that's
Okay.
on. I'm not trying to do a book for her, but I do want to give her credit because I learned from her, and she's fabulous, and it was really close to the principles, I thought. So it's a good book.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Who else? Annette.
I would just like to thank Paul for asking that question and Mary for answering it so well. I'm a counsellor as well, Mary, and I've just finished a coaching course, and I'm thinking just set up a practice with 2 different parts to it, and people come for what they want, and then does it get a bit, how do I maybe move into coaching if I'm a counsellor, or a bit of counselling if I'm a coach, and just wondering how that would all fit together, and does it fit together, because I've never really clarified that for myself. And I liked, I like that kind of authenticity of letting the client know and requesting if you can maybe wear a different hat and do a bit of coaching in a session. So it's kind of how to how to pull that all together that has been really interesting to me. So thank you for saying all of that. It's been really helpful. And again, wondering how I would, in a coaching session, bring in the 3 principles and do an educational bit, when in fact this is a client session and their agenda. So that idea about asking that question of the client to help them in the process has been helpful. So thank you for that. So sorry it wasn't a question, but
Oh, that's okay.
yeah, probably after today there'll be a lot of more questions I would like to ask. So
yeah. Well, you can feel free to email me any questions you want. So, I'm glad you're asking or stating these or making these points and asking these questions, because I didn't, like I said before I got on here, I'm like, what am I going to talk about? I don't know how. So I didn't realize that, that I'm kind of seeing more into I'm answering myself even as I'm answering these questions. Let's just put it that way. Like, oh yeah, I guess I do that. Like, I didn't realize that until you asked that question, Paul, that by actually formally asking permission to, but formally stating, okay, I'm taking off this hat and putting on this hat, it's clear. It's not meandering. It's a intentional transition. And then we stay focused, and then we get more done, and the client gets more out of it. So. Early on way back when in the 3 principles world, I would just watch all of the pioneers and listen to my mentor, who was also a pioneer, and just kind of watch them and watch how they question and watch how they worked. And people would just say, just be yourself, just listen. When in doubt, listen. And listening is key too. I mean, listening, when in doubt, listen. And now I know, when in doubt, ask the client where to go next, what would be helpful. But there was a lot of meandering that went on. And not that that's a bad thing, but I would sometimes depending on the person, of course, sometimes you could stay just this like on task because it's just the way you dialogue with each other. But there were people where we could go all over the place, and it would be so diffuse that it was hard to really feel like anything got done in that session. So I love this idea of zeroing in and kind of staying with the client, but also, staying with what's helpful for them, asking, is this still helpful? And then they get to guide the session, or lead the session rather. I love the cat picture. If my dog saw that, she'd be like,
Marty, say more about zeroing in.
oh, chat.
I just see that am I coming through here?
Yep, you're fine.
Oh, I just see that this might sound obvious, but the obvious is it really is about people changing. And if they're burdened in some way, and the burden is somewhat specific, if they're not getting the change through understanding a deeper level of consciousness, then it really is going to be necessary to bring some attention to some pattern that's repeating in some way.
Mhm.
So there's certain times I had certain patterns, like jealousy or something like that. And then I sort of had an insight of how ridiculous it was. And then once I saw that, I went back deeper into myself, and that pattern disappeared, at least temporarily. It depends on how deep I would see it.
Mhm.
But I have not done any coaching per se. I sort of like old school, where you share as deeply as you possibly can, and then people will find their own conclusions. But that doesn't always, people sometimes need more guidance into what they're perceiving, what their attention's going to, and needing to see through their thinking that's really causing them distress and lack of happiness and all that kind of thing. So, I mean, the other side of it, I remember one time I was at a conference with Sid, and I thought, you know what, something's really bothering me. I saw him on the other side of the room, and and I thought, you know what? I see he's talking to someone. I'm going to go over there. I'm going to walk over there, and when he's finished talking to that person, it's my turn. So I got about 50 feet away, and I'm still thinking, remember what it is you want to talk about here. And then I got about 30 feet, 20 feet away, and then I was having trouble remembering what my issue was. And then I got about 10 feet away, and I'm kind of getting close to stopping and waiting. I cannot for the life of me remember why I am there. Like, what was the issue? It had like completely disappeared. And now I'm just feeling fantastic. So, I mean, if you can just get into that, and your wisdom will start to come out and help find your answers to your own problems, that can be good. But I think, and the reason I came on the call, because I mean, I know I've been watching coaching for decades and decades, through the Pranskys and people like that. But personally speaking, it wasn't my big interest. And I could see they do good work. I could also see that many people who went for counseling or mentoring or whatever you want to call it, coaching with them, would end up changing quite a bit. In fact, people would become coaches themselves. Many people who are coaching today are all ex, or I guess they're mentees or something, whatever they call them, people like the Pranskys. So, and I think that's all good. And I want to become a little more familiar with it. And I like what you're saying, because the point is change. And unless the focus is, like, if the person can let go of it, great, of what's holding them back. But if there's something repeating in thought, then it must be you have to. The point is, I heard a little bit of Byron Cadian when you were talking there.
Mhm.
And because there's great things taught by various teachers, right?
Yep.
And you find an aspect from a great teacher is wonderful. And her thing is, well, like, you have to do the work inside you and take a look at it. No one can. How does anybody know how complex you got to this particular moment? No, impossible. So you have to do the work. And I can see now the coach is going to if you're willing, they're gonna help you focus on the work you need to do.
Mhm.
That's kind of the way I'm seeing it. It's
Yeah.
focusing, putting the focus on it. It's not for people to sort of sit there and whine and complain and express their lostness on a continuous basis. That starts to get involved in poor me and things like that. So that has to be eventually left behind.
Mhm. Yeah.
So I'm enjoying this. That's good.
Yeah, thank you. Is it Marty? Martin?
Yep.
Martin.
Yep.
No, a lot of things came up while you were saying, where you were talking, and one of them was that, there's the three principles understanding, and that's what it is. It's an understanding. It's not an approach. Three
Yeah.
principles is not an approach. It's the truth about our humanity, about our connection, who we really are, and how our experience happens. So, but it just so happens that because it's to me, it's like the thing to see. It's and when, like I said earlier, when you're touched, so if you get touched deeply by this, at least for me, I just had to tell people about it. I couldn't not tell people about it.
Yeah.
And I wanted to do that in a formal way. So then you enter into an arena like coaching, counseling, business consulting, education, whatever the arena is. But those are professions, and there's skills with those professions.
Yeah.
So I think what I saw happening, and I think what happened for me too, was kind of, even though I was getting my degree in psychology, we didn't have a lot of counseling skills. It was
Yeah.
much more theory. So when I ended up being a therapist, I had to flounder around trying to share this, and I didn't really have the skills except for the listening.
Yeah.
And I knew how to teach, but that wasn't always going to get it because people didn't always hear it.
Yeah.
So like you're saying, so what I found with this was like, finally I have, and I mean, I developed some of my own skills along the way, but this really helped me to hone in on a way of dialoguing without what this laser focused coaching skills has helped me to do. What I noticed in the training when we would have practice sessions was people were tapping insights and wisdom was flowing. It was exactly the end result that happens when people understand the principles, because really what's behind anybody's problem is their own thinking.
Yeah.
And that was stated in the course too. It's like, it's always a thought, but they didn't have the principles understanding. So I thought, oh my gosh, so here's a structure, if you will, like Jerry was saying, to a way of dialoguing that helps people pull out their own knowledge and see beyond their own blind spots. And it's and then you got the power of the understanding behind that.
Yeah.
And that can enter in. So it becomes even more powerful work. So the Pranskys have spent years honing their ability to, here's what I know, here's what they know, how do I bridge the gap? How do I help them? How do I help them see what I see? And they spent years honing their own skills, and they're very, very skilled at it. But anyway, do you want to say something?
I remember them. I guess 2 or 3 months ago, I was listening to Linda, and she was saying, she said something like, they would sometimes ask their client, the basic question was, do you really want to change now? Do you really want to solve this? And if you don't, let's not go there. And so it was quite interesting. They were quite forward, but in a very loving way.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's all kinds of different ways of going about this, but I think that having a way and having some deep listening and dialoguing skills is very helpful with being able to create really good results.
Yeah. I love the asking the question, making sure that you're getting a connection.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
because without that, I mean, I've done that many times. In fact, many, many years ago, I got myself in really big trouble a few times where like I was so enthusiastic about learning the principles. And like I thought, oh my God, the answer to life, and little old Marty Lipsky is getting to kind of see a bit of this. And everybody should know all about this, including my mother and and people like that. And oh man, and I remember one conference, you know, I really got in trouble because I was pressing other people, always pressing. And yeah, I mean, obviously not the route to go, because, you know, you don't even have to really speak the principles. It's not really exactly in the words. But someone who wants to know, like someone will ask you a question, by the way, how did you find this? Or who
Yes.
told you this? What did they tell you? And then that'll be obvious. Then you can flow on. But to most people, like everybody, you know, I worked with someone on heartfelt presence the other day, and they were a very troubled person, and they were very careful. They didn't want to share, you know, like anytime you said anything, oh no, I don't want to hear that. But they kept expressing their problem. And after about a half an hour, the person finally said, well, what they really want to find in life is stability. How do I become stable? And here's where what you said comes in. And though not quite normal for me, because I'm not in these situations, I asked her, well, what does she think is the answer to this?
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah.
And she said to me, well, there's something inside me that holds me safe.
Mm.
And that was like, I love the question thing. You have to connect.
Mhm.
I mean, it's in every situation with anybody at any time. That's, I think, the case. No, I like the way you pointed that out. Without that connection, you just whistling Dixie, as they say in the United States. Nothing going on.
Right. Yeah.
Marty, thanks so much for raising all of that. And
Mhm.
I notice we're just coming towards the end of our time, so I'd like to give it back to you. I don't know if there's anything that you would like to add before we close. It's been a delightful call, really delightful. Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it's just in terms of, you know, this work is about transformation and change, whether you're a coach or a therapist or a mentor. It's all about, and a three principles facilitator. So it's all about transformation and change. And there's lots of different ways of going about that. And I just think that, so if we're going to talk about specifically coaching and three principles and what I've learned, it's just first of all, you know, knowing what you know and continuing your own evolution. And in the coaching world, really making it about the client and asking the connection and asking, you know, having the dialogue, as I kind of laid out earlier. For me, the laser focused approach was, if you want to call it an approach, Marion would say it's not an approach, but just the idea of the guidance of it is very helpful with zoning in, keeping a lot of story out, staying on point and making it relevant to the person you're talking to. And it just feels clean. The whole process feels clean to me. So I've been really grateful for having been able to merge those two together and to actually have some skills so that now I can actually build a coaching practice, because before I didn't see how I could do that. So
Well, it's been a fabulous call, and you know, thanks so much for for sharing so much of what you've learned. It's really been invaluable, and I've really, yeah, I really loved it. Thank you.